Ladies and gents, hello and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at a 2020 MacBook Air. This is the Intel model and it is the base configuration, the cheapest one that you could get. We're going to see how it stacks up here in 2024 and decide whether or not you should get one. The short answer is probably not, but we're going to jump into it. First things first, let's take a look at the specs of my specific unit. So we've got the 1.1 gigahertz dual-core i3. That is a 2-core, 4-thread processor. It's an Intel 10th gen CPU. That's paired with Intel Iris Plus graphics. That is the G4 variant, which is a little bit different than some of the other configurations for this MacBook Air. Both of those are paired with 8 gigabytes of LPDDR4X memory. So those are the performance specs, and my specific unit does actually have the upgraded storage coming in at 500 gigabytes. The standard configuration was 256. For an extra $200, you could double that to 512. Now, we are running Mac OS Sequoia. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But at the time of recording, this is the latest version. So there's the specs. Let's go over the externals of our MacBook Air, and then we're going to talk performance, look at some benchmarks, do a little gaming, see how it performs in everyday tasks, and then decide, is it worth it? So starting off, let's talk about the front of the MacBook. This is Apple's updated Magic Keyboard that they introduced in 2019 and updated the MacBook Air here in 2020 with it. It's a great keyboard, fantastic, no problems, backlit, good key travel, very nicely spaced out. We do have Touch ID up here built into the power button. That is a nice feature as well. Below the keyboard is the trackpad. This is a fantastic trackpad. It is force touch. It does not actually click, but there's a vibration motor that clicks when you tap it. If you've never used one, it is a real treat. It's very difficult to go back to any older trackpad after you have experienced this. On either side of the keyboard, we do have stereo speakers, so you'll notice a bunch of little holes there. That is where the speakers are on our MacBook Air, and they actually sound surprisingly good for the size of this computer. It is pretty astonishing that Apple has been able to fit as good a quality speakers that they did inside of here. I think you'll be impressed if you're used to some other speakers on laptops that are not the same caliber here as Apple's. Moving on to the left side, we do have two Thunderbolt 3 ports. These are in the USB-C configuration. No surprise there. That is how you charge the MacBook. So if you're charging, you only have one other port to plug anything else in. That is a big limitation, at least in my opinion. On the right side, we have a headphone jack. That is not a high impedance headphone jack. That is introduced on the M1 Pro models, and I believe it's carried over into some other MacBooks as well. This one does not have that. Of course, we got to talk about the display. This is a 13.3-inch Retina display, and it looks great. It's an LCD, it's 60 hertz, so it's certainly not the nicest panel you can get, but for what it is very nice. It's got really good viewing angles, as you can see here. We can tilt almost 90 degrees, and you're still able to see what's on the display. The colors are nice. The brightness goes up to 400 nits, which is not the best in the world, but for an average laptop, it is just fine. We do have our 720p webcam up here at the top. We're not going to test that out because the quality is, quite frankly, really bad. All right, so if we close the lid, you can see we do have this beautiful tapered design, thicker at the back, thinner in the front. Looks really nice. This is a very light MacBook Air. It weighs less than 3 pounds, if I remember correctly, and you can basically throw this in a bag, a backpack, whatever you want, and it is very portable. On the bottom, we've got our feet, little rubber guys there, and we have our pentalobe screws around the outside should you ever need to open it up. That said, nothing in here is upgradable, so the only reason you'd want to open it is maybe to replace the battery, which you can actually do. You can replace the battery, and that is all you're able to do inside the MacBook. All right, we talked about the externals. Now let's talk about the internals, and this is where this MacBook starts to show its age. This dual-core Intel i3 is pathetic. It is really not good for much anymore. This is the last dual-core MacBook or Mac computer of any kind to run Mac OS Sequoia, at least natively. So, like we said before, it's the 10th gen i3. It's a dual-core chip, and quite frankly, it's very slow, and it's not cooled properly, so it thermal throttles almost immediately. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to launch Intel Power Gadget here. That's going to show us the CPU temperature. We're going to keep that in the background here. We're looking at around 50 degrees Celsius. Now, we're going to run through some daily tasks here. We've got Safari, and we're going to head into Apple's website and kind of just scroll around and see what we've got. So Apple's been introducing new things this week. We've got our new iMac. Let's open that in a new tab. What about the Mac Mini? This thing's super cool. I'm actually really tempted to get one of these. I think it would look really nice, and I love that it has a bunch of ports. And of course, today, Apple announced the new MacBook Pro with the M4 chip. So here we go. We've got 4 tabs open. They're all from Apple's own website, so they should be basically as efficient and run as good as possible on their own hardware. So if we scroll through here, it is actually pretty smooth. So I'm recording this video in 60 frames per second. So any sort of stuttering or lag will show up for you guys because, like, once again, this panel is a 60 hertz display. So it is a little laggy there as we kind of scroll through. You can kind of get some chop there as this website slides between the different colors of the new iMac. And so that is pretty cool to see here, the newest stuff on our Intel MacBook Air. Now, if we go back here, look at the temperatures. We were up at we were all the way up to 100 degrees there where it flatlined, and then our CPU began to throttle. So even just scrolling through Safari, this thing hits 100 degrees Celsius because that CPU is not cooled properly. There's no heatsink, but there is a fan that just spins aimlessly. That's a story for another day, but this thing is not capable of sustained performance at all. And by performance, I mean scrolling through Safari on probably the most efficient website that there is, at least for Apple computers. That said, it is fine to use on Safari here. I mean, it works well. It's fairly smooth. It loads pretty quickly. That's going to depend obviously on your Wi-Fi a little bit, but the experience is overall just fine. Now, what else can we do? Well, I don't have anything else on here. I'm sure you could go through photos and it would be just fine for that as well. Email is going to work fine. Obviously, text messages, notes, calendar, music's going to be good. Now, where I would advise you to stay away from is any sort of video editing. And I can say that because I've tried. In fact, I edited an entire video on a MacBook Air just like this. I think it was the i5 model, and it was a horrible experience. Keep in mind, it was 4K 60 HDR footage, so pretty taxing. The MacBook Air is certainly not up to the task there. So stay away from that. Everyday tasks should be just fine, although I do think it's going to get warm and you're going to hear that fan because the computer's going to try to cool itself, but it's not going to be able to. All right, so what else can we do? Well, we can look at some benchmarks. I ran Geekbench 6, and those results are around here somewhere. I think I'm going to have to open them again from history. All right, so we'll start with the CPU. Single core came in at 1262, multi-core at 2017. Super low numbers. Even the single core performance of Apple Silicon is better than the multi-core here we got on this Intel MacBook Air. So really, really slow. And if we're comparing this to the M1 model MacBook Air, which is the slowest of the Apple Silicon bunch, that thing scored 8,000 on multi-core. So keep that in mind. This thing is 1/4 of the CPU performance of an M1 MacBook Air. Moving on to GPU, our metal score was 6,500. That's about a third or a fourth of what you'll get with an Apple M1 chip. So another huge win for Apple Silicon. Performance-wise, this thing is not your friend in any regard. And to really showcase that, we're going to push this thing to its limits. We're going to fire up Minecraft, and I'm going to show you just how bad this thing plays Minecraft. And to really put things in perspective, I'm also going to load Minecraft on the iPhone 6s that I have here. This is in the rose gold color. This thing is running iOS 15, whatever the last version of that is. We're going to play Minecraft on our MacBook Air and our iPhone 6s, and you guys are going to see the difference in performance here. I know it's not completely apples to apples, but I think it's going to showcase my point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new world on both of these devices. I'm going to try to make it the exact same, and we're going to see how this thing performs. So our seed is going to be GoJot on both of these devices. And it's both a creative world, so we'll go ahead and create this new map here on both the MacBook Air 2020 with its dual-core i3 and the iPhone 6s with its dual-core A9 chip, and we'll see how well they perform. Now, keep in mind, the iPhone 6s only has 2 gigs of RAM versus 8 gigabytes here on the MacBook Air, and I believe the GPU in here is going to be quite a bit better. But in terms of CPU performance, I almost think that the iPhone 6s is pretty close. We're going to find out here once this loads. So the MacBook Air was first, not really too surprising there. Let's go ahead and, well, never mind. I'm going to go ahead and fly up here and we'll take a quick peek around. Keep in mind that this is the same world on both of these devices. So you can see that the map is beginning to load in, but it is sure taking its time. So let's do that same thing here on the 6S, and look how much smoother this is. This is running at pure 60 frames per second. And where is the sun, or the moon, I guess is what we're looking at on both sides. Let me go ahead and max out the render distance because I think it is quite a bit higher here on the MacBook Air. So we're at 9 chunks, and I think the default is either 8 or 12 on the PC version. So all we can do here is 9, but look how much smoother this is when I look around. And I should point out that this is running at half resolution. I did drop that down when I loaded this game prior to recording. So we're not actually running at native MacBook Air resolution, but this is so smooth. This is really 60 frames per second. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run towards the edge of the map here, and we're gonna see how well it renders in. And it looks like we're gonna get the edge pretty quickly there. So unfortunately, well, actually it's keeping up decently well. We did hit a wall there, but this thing, the iPhone did okay. So it's very smooth, a little slow to render. What about our MacBook Air? You guys can see how stuttery this is. Certainly not 60 frames per second. I'm not even sure if this is 30. So there we hit the wall. And so this is, for you guys that don't know, this is a CPU intensive game for the most part. And we've just lost everything. So it uses the CPU to render in new parts of the map. And this thing is beginning to catch up. Not really a good experience here. Now, if you were playing in survival mode, I do think this would be okay, because obviously you'd just be running on the ground. You wouldn't be flying around. So I'd say we're looking at between 20 and 30 frames per second. So certainly playable, but if you were to fire this up on an M1 MacBook Air, it would be buttery smooth. You could crank up the settings and you would get 60 frames per second all day, even at high render distances. So I would say this is playable, but you got to drop the resolution and you should probably drop the render distance. So that's going to conclude our Minecraft test. So a few more small things to talk about here. This is an Intel MacBook Air. That means it does come standard with Boot Camp. So you can in fact run Windows 10 or Windows 11 natively on here. Apple has their own application built in to let you do that. So it partitions the SSD, and one side keeps Mac OS, the other installs Windows. So that is pretty cool. All you got to do is download Windows 10 from Microsoft, and you can get that installed pretty easily. So I mentioned before, this is running Mac OS Sequoia. I am pretty confident that's going to be the last version that this thing supports. Honestly, sort of surprised that it actually got Sequoia, and I really don't think we're going to see another Mac OS update for the Intel MacBook Air. Maybe even none of the other Intel MacBooks, although I do think potentially the 2020 will get it. But I think that's going to do it for this video. Overall, in summary, should you buy one of these in 2024? Probably not, unless you just need a really basic MacBook and you can find one for a really good price. I honestly wouldn't pay more than like $250 for one of these. The M1 MacBook Air has really come down in price. I'm seeing those for like $350 to $400, and I would say it's definitely worth your money to save for that. Or if you can't afford it and you're looking at the 300 and less range, go for like a 2015 MacBook Pro 13-inch. Honestly, it's going to perform better than this is, and you still get a Retina display and you get some more ports. So really not a good value here for a 2020 Intel MacBook Air, regardless of the CPU, because again, it's not cooled. So you could get the quad-core i7 and it sounds like it's going to be a fast computer, but it's not, because it throttles very quickly. So no point in spending extra money on a CPU upgrade for this thing. All right, that's going to do it for this video. That's been a look at Apple's last dual-core supported Mac computer, specifically our Intel 2020 MacBook Air. Thank you so much for watching. Leave me a comment down below. Are you using an Intel MacBook Air or a MacBook Pro? What's your experience, and can you still recommend it here in 2024? Because I'm really struggling to recommend this model to just about anyone. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.